Good morning, guys. It's day two. That's right, day two in our 40-day challenge. And I hope that you're bringing some grit today because you're going to face the desire to quit. That's right. You're going to say, this is going to require some work. I'm going to have to adjust some of my habits, some of those things that are comfortable to me, familiar to me. And you're going to have to say, no, I'm going to prioritize these things. And I want to bring my A game here. I want to see God at work in my life. I want change to take place, right? There are certain things you're going to want to see worked in your life by God's grace over these 40 days. What specifically could that be? Well, that's the outcomes, and that's the whole point of our reading today in the text that Matthes gives us at the conclusion of the introduction. And he zeroes in on outcomes. What's an outcome? It's the tangible things that we want to see achieved in whatever it is that we're doing. So we've talked about the purpose, which zeroes in more on why we're doing this. We've talked about that in our orientation, and now that Matthes, as he leads to the conclusion of his introduction, he zeroes in on the outcomes. As we hold on to those outcomes, it's really important because that will be one more tool in our tool belt that'll help us fight against the constant nagging to quit, to give up. You don't need to do this. Why do this? It gives you one more reason to say, no, I'm pressing forward. I'm not quitting. I have to retool. I have to maybe rejig, realign things, and that's okay. I need to learn from today and the challenges that I faced, but I'm not quitting. And you just adjust the pace that you're going through your day. And that's all part of what we talked about in our orientation. But now the rubber hits the road, and you literally have to decide today how you're going to walk through this day. And that's going to lead into the next day, and that'll lead into the next day. Okay, Matthes zeroes in specifically on the outcomes, and you're going to see that in a section in the book. He actually entitles it The Great End of the Means, and that's where I want you to be able to provide some feedback, and I'll give you a question to answer in a few minutes here. All right, Matthes does a great job in this section, I think, highlighting the Apostle Paul. He zeroes in on his witness and his testimony, and this is what he said. Paul's own reliance on God for ongoing grace is a powerful testimony to the Christian dynamic of the means of grace and the habits of life we cultivate. He says in 1 Corinthians 15:10, "By the grace of God I am what I am. I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that was in me." God's grace didn't make Paul passive, but supplied the energy for discipline and effort. And every ounce of energy expended was all of God's grace. I love that. It is really zeroing in on what he talked about in Philippians 2, verses 12 and 13, where he said, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you to will and to do for his good pleasure." And he talked about doing that in the context of all their life being uncompartmentalized before God. Because at the beginning of those verses, he said, "You've obeyed, you've followed this teaching, not only in my presence, but also in my absence." And don't you want to be that kind of Christian where you know God is at work in your life? And there's a transparency in your life. There's a congruency between who you are at work, who you are at home, who you are in your own private time, and in the headspace that you have all alone. That's the kind of person I want to be, someone that is walking in a manner that's worthy of the Lord. And so really what Matthes zeroes in here is saying Paul learned how to do that. We have to learn how to do that. That's part of the 40-day challenge. It's learning, it's growing, it's adjusting, it's adapting. So your day didn't go well yesterday, or today it's getting off to a tricky start. That's okay. Adjust your pace. What do you need to learn from that? How do you need to retool and recalibrate so that you can go back at it by God's grace at work in you? And one way that we can do that is looking a little further into our reading today, where he zeroes in on an illustration of two men, Zacchaeus and Bartimaeus. And he said that those guys, they knew grace was en route through their area, literally Jesus. And they put themselves in the pathway for grace to work. And that's what these spiritual disciplines or the habits of grace are doing. We're not the ones that are activating or sourcing the power. It is God at work in us to will and to do. But we must put ourselves in the pathway for God to work. And he gives a definition of spiritual disciplines from Don Whitney, who said this: think of spiritual disciplines as ways we can place ourselves in the path of God's grace and seek him as Bartimaeus and Zacchaeus placed themselves in Jesus' path and sought him. That's kind of cool illustration, and helps me to really frame up, well, what then would be the outcome of what it is that I'm hoping these 40 days from practicing this spiritual habit will do in my life. And that gets us to our section for our question today that deals with the outcome. It's entitled The Great End of the Means. And I want you to read over this section especially, maybe a couple times. And I want you to put in your own words, what is Mathis trying to argue here? What is he trying to say should be our outcome in practicing the means of grace and practicing these spiritual disciplines, these habits, okay? What in your words and in the comments below, share that. So as you're working through the day and you finish your nutrition habit and you practice your exercise habit and you've completed reading your, again, spiritual habit, in the comments below, not only say you're done, but also put your answer to that question. Put into your own words, what is Mathis trying to say should be the outcome or outcomes that we should be looking at for accomplishing these 40 days, specifically related to the spiritual habit I'm talking about. All right? Well, again, I hope that you bring your grit today, that consistent and steadfast perseverance in the same trajectory with us all. We're all in this together. So if you're challenged by something today, please share that in the comments below as well. And maybe we can, you have a group of at least 60 or 70 others that are participating in this. We all can encourage one another. So maybe we face some challenges. Encourage one another how to overcome. But again, make sure minimally you take the time to not only say, check in and say, yep, I'm done, those different habits, and answer that question. What is it that Mathis is trying to say in your own words should be the great end or the outcome of the means of grace at work in our life? Okay? I look forward to seeing your feedback and walking this journey in day 2 together. Go Team Grit!